Hello everyone and welcome back to the Level Up English podcast, the best place to come to practice the English language, learn about the British accent and culture with me, your host, Michael Lavers. And you might be noticing, if you're listening, you might hear something that's a little bit different today. I really hope the audio sounds okay, but I'm trying something a little bit new, just a one-time experiment where I thought I would come out and do an outside podcast today. Just something a little bit different. I'm not going to do this every time, but if you do want to watch along with me, you can come to my YouTube channel, which is Level Up English Podcast on YouTube. So that way you can watch along, you can watch me walking through, I'm in Bangkok Park in Bangkok, Thailand. You can watch me go for a walk while we do the podcast today. And I really hope the sound is okay as well. So if you don't want to watch on YouTube, you're welcome to watch or listen on audio as normal, and hopefully it should still be listenable. But if you are watching, then welcome. Hope you are enjoying this video. I'm going to be a little bit awkward today, perhaps maybe looking around, seeing who's watching me, because it has been a while since I've done an outdoor video. It's very hot. It looks like it might rain in a little bit though. And I am all ready to play badminton after this recording, as you can see, maybe from the rackets on my back, the badminton rackets in my bag. But I thought this would be a good video to film outside today because I want to talk about relocation. So location is of course like a place. Re means again. So this word relocation means moving to a new place, moving again and changing the place where you live. Unless this is your first time, you may know that I have somewhat recently relocated to Thailand, and it's been a huge change in my life, one of the biggest changes in my life so far. So maybe if one of you out there have also had experience with relocating and going to a new country or a new place to live, maybe you can leave a comment on this episode and let me know your experiences. But yeah, it is a really beautiful park. I think one of the downsides of Bangkok is that there are not too many parks, especially when you compare to London or other cities like that. But there are a couple big ones in the center, and this is one of them, and it's got a very nice natural forest park area, which is where I am right now. And I think it's quite new as well. I think this has been redeveloped in the past 2 years. And at the moment I'm walking along the Sky Bridge, which is like a raised footpath that you can get beautiful views of the park and the skyscrapers around the center of Bangkok. But I guess I'll get right into the episode today. I don't know how long I'm going to ramble for today, but I want to talk about some benefits of moving abroad and some of the new things that you might experience when you relocate, even if it's not abroad. One of these is starting from scratch. This is a really good expression to begin this episode with. If you start from scratch, that means you have a fresh and new beginning. So I think this is one benefit that many people find when they move to a new place. A new country is even larger, even more exaggerated, where you feel like you can start fresh, you can start from scratch. And what I mean by that is no one knows who you are, no one knows about your past life, so you can almost just make new friends and not have the baggage of your previous life. When I use the word baggage here, it means some past experiences that might negatively affect how people perceive you, how people view you. And I think I found that to be the case for me as well. It's quite nice making friends and meeting people, because even if we try really hard to meet people with a fresh mind and not with any negative views of ourselves, it's always there, I think, in the back of your mind. So when you're in a new place, a new environment, you can kind of naturally become someone a little bit different. And of course, naturally, we are influenced by our environment as well. So where we are in the world also affects who we are and how we act. I think that's been quite a nice experience for me. For example, I'll give you a practical example, a concrete example. I've always felt like I'm quite shy, and in the UK maybe I will be a bit more shy because that's what I'm used to there. But coming here, I can kind of be a bit more confident, a bit more outgoing, because I don't have that same baggage that I have in my home country. So I don't know if that makes sense to all of you, but if you kind of relate to what I'm saying, then let me know. Leave a comment and let me know if you've experienced having a fresh start somewhere before. I think I might need to start walking a bit slower than I was just now. It's really hot here. I'm getting out of breath. I think it's about 36 degrees and it's still somewhat early in the morning, so it's only going to get hotter from here. But anyway, speaking of weather, I think that's another thing that you might find going to a new place. So here we can talk about two somewhat similar words. We have the verb to adapt and the verb to acclimatize. To adapt is to get used to a new situation, or it could be a new type of culture, a new type of weather, or something like that. How quickly can you change to suit that new environment? So in this case, we can talk about adapting to a new culture, for example. In this specific case, the culture of Thailand is very different from the culture of the UK. And that might take some time to adapt to that new way of living, especially if you're not used to it. For me, it maybe took a few months to fully adapt and get used to the pace of life here. In some sense, things are a lot slower. People are more laid back. Although when it comes to driving, it's the total opposite. And people are much more stressed, it seems, and they go much faster. So that's something I've had to get used to and I've had to adapt to over some time. But I think now I have fully adapted to that. If you acclimatize to something, acclimatize, it's a little bit similar. You're adapting, but it's more commonly used for, of course, climate. It's got that word climate in there. So if you're going up a mountain, you might need to acclimatize to the new kind of atmosphere and the lack of oxygen at the top of a mountain. And I've also spoken to many people who have moved to Thailand and how they might take some time to acclimatize to the hot weather here. It's very hot and humid and sticky, and that can take some time getting used to. For example, we recently had a heat wave here in Bangkok where temperatures on a daily basis were getting above 40 degrees Celsius, which is pretty hot. Fortunately, we do have lots of air conditioning, but it was quite tough to deal with. If you're still using the same habits as you were from your home country, you may be having a tough time acclimatizing to that and getting used to that. One kind of practical tip for that, I've noticed a lot of people here walk much slower than we would in London, for example. And I think it's partly because of the heat. If you have the same pace and walking style as you do in London, you're going to get very hot and sweaty here. Another thing is the time of day that people go outside. If you go outside in the middle of the day, a little bit like I am today, you will get very hot. So you have to acclimatize and adapt to how people do things in the new country or the new place where you're living. So maybe you can let me know in the comments if you've had to acclimatize to a new climate before, or adapt to a new culture or way of life. I think two tips that I would give on that topic, by the way, before we move on, is first of all, not to judge the new culture you're in. I do see a lot of people, or a few people, who have moved here to Thailand being quite judgmental over some of the things they're not used to, or viewing them as inferior. That means not as good as the way that they were used to. And I think it's very important not to judge and accept that different cultures do things in a different way, of course. And there's often a reason for that. It's not as random as it might seem. So exactly as I said before, walking slower, it can get annoying sometimes when you're in a rush, but I think you have to adapt to that and not judge people for walking at a different pace to what you're used to. It's just how things are done, for example. I think another really nice tip that I like to remind myself of is that when you're in another country, you're kind of a representative of your own country. So everyone you meet is, unfortunately, judging your whole country based on your actions. And we all do this, right? When you see someone in the news from a certain country acting a certain way, it's very easy to allow that to negatively affect your opinion of their whole country. You know, when you see British tourists going to Spain, getting really drunk, We tend to have a bad view of all British tourists, but I promise we're not all like that. But because of that, I try to keep that in mind. So when I'm interacting with people in a new country, I try to be polite and respectful, and hopefully that will affect their opinion of everyone in your country as well. You're doing your part as your country's representative. I think that's a nice way of looking at it. One more thing that I find really interesting when you go to a new place is how long it takes you to settle in. Good phrasal verb here, to settle in. If you settle in to a new place, it's like you get comfortable in that new place. You're comfortable living in that new place. So you might move to a new town, a new city, a new country, but it may take some weeks or even longer before you really feel comfortable there. For me, when it comes to traveling, I feel like it takes at least a week for me to settle in and get a little bit comfortable with the new pace of life. However, when it comes to relocating and moving, your whole life to a new place, I noticed it took a lot longer for me. So as I said before, it took me around about 2 months to settle in, because in those first 2 months, I was still in travel mode. If you have ever moved to a new country before, I think you'll know what I mean by this. But for the first 2 months, I was, thinking about going somewhere every day, exploring new places, meeting people, all this kind of really high energy, fast-paced travel lifestyle, that kind of stuff. And maybe it took me longer than for most people, I don't know. But for example, in the first few weeks, if I had a day where I would stay at home and not go out for the whole day, I would feel really guilty, like I was kind of wasting my time. Now I've been here a lot longer and it feels a lot more comfortable now. But I do think it takes some time to settle in fully and switch from travel mode to kind of daily life mode. But even if you're not moving abroad or relocating, this is a really good word that you can use to settle in, just to get comfortable in a new place. So even if you just move house within your same town, it might take some time to settle in somewhere. So that might be getting furniture that you like, getting artwork on the walls that you like. All of these things help you settle in. I think for me, a big thing was just having a kind of daily routine, having the same places that I go to, the same shops I go to, the walks I like to do, just finding that routine that works for me. And once I had that, I settled in. And it doesn't mean I don't have any adventure anymore. It just means I maybe have more of a balance now between that kind of exciting travel lifestyle and a little bit more of a stable living style as well. I can also tell you a little story about the first time I came here as well, which was a little bit chaotic, but I think it's kind of interesting. So one thing you might do when you move to a new place is, or you might consider, is downsizing. Downsizing. So to downsize, maybe you can guess what this means based on the word, but this is where you move to a new place and you bring fewer things with you than you had before. So you have to sell some things, get rid of some old furniture, for example, and in your new place, you might have a smaller place with less room. That's what I tend to do every time I move. I think it's difficult to bring everything with you, so you might have to downsize. But I think there are 2 types of people that might move abroad or move to Thailand. And there are those who will pay extortionate amounts of money. Extortionate means really high, really expensive, like incredibly expensive. Lots of money basically to ship their things from their home country over to here, over to the new country. And that could be fine, especially if you have a lot of stuff that you need or that you like. But of course it can get very expensive to ship things across the world in big boxes. So my preference would be to come with as few things as I possibly can. And if I need something, I can buy it when I arrive. So that's what I did. I downsized, and this may surprise some of you, but I was able to fit all of my things into one suitcase. Usually when I travel, I just bring this backpack. I don't bring any suitcase, but I was able to fit everything I owned in one suitcase, and that is what I took across the world with me to start my new life. And inside the suitcase, there were things like my exercise mat, my big microphone, that kind of stuff, that boring kind of stuff. So yes, I downsized quite a lot. I certainly didn't upsize, which is where you buy more things. I brought less things here. However, as I said, I don't usually have a suitcase, so it was really my first time in many years where I had a big suitcase with me. And it was really stressful. I arrived in the city, I couldn't really walk anywhere because it was too big and heavy. And I found out that none of the taxi drivers really wanted to accept me because they didn't have room for my suitcase. So we ended up just kind of walking around, dragging these suitcases around. I feel like we almost got scammed, like someone tried to give us a ride, but it just seemed a bit off to me. I think someone was trying to scam me. So I said no to that guy. And eventually we did get someone, he was really nice, and he managed to squeeze the suitcases into the back of his taxi. But that was really stressful, and it wasn't a nice way to come into a new country. So maybe in hindsight, that means thinking ahead, I would have had a better plan as to what to do with my suitcase. There's so many really cool animals that you'll see in this park. So if you see any in the background, you'll have to let me know. We've got really cool birds, lizards, turtles, all that kind of stuff here. So it's really interesting. And I've also got a spider web on my face. So one of the many perils, the many dangers of filming outside, I suppose. I'd also like to talk about two more things, which is, I guess, two more phrasal verbs actually, but they're really useful. And this is fit in and stand out. Fitting in and standing out. So to fit in, we can talk about this one first, is the desire to be seen as the same as other people. So you don't want to look different, you don't want to look crazy or unusual. You want to look the same as other people. And I think this is a natural human desire. We all want to fit in, we all want to seem the same as others. And it can be quite difficult, especially when you're in a country where you don't look the same as everyone else. Of course, it is a lot easier in a big city like this, but having said that, I don't think you should really have that expectation that you're going to fit in completely. And you may never fit in a new country. And I think that's one of the downsides of relocating to a place that's very different. You may never fit in as well as you would at home. And I think that might make you appreciate some things about your home as well. But there are some things you could do to fit in. And I'll speak from personal experience as well. But one of them, of course, is to learn at least a few basic phrases of the language if you're relocating abroad. My Thai is not very good, but it does go a long way. I try to learn some good phrases and learn how to order a coffee or ask directions. And a little bit really does help. And I think people really appreciate a little bit of effort. So that helps you fit in a bit more. And I think it also helps you stand out, which means look different. You're not looking the same as the tourists. Not that it's bad to be a tourist, but tourists are more likely, I would say, to be victims of scams, and you might be charged more for certain things. So for that reason, you might not want to look like a typical tourist. And knowing some phrases in the language will definitely go a long way in doing that, because most tourists don't know much of the language of the country they're visiting. And yes, I also mentioned that phrasal verb to stand out. I guess you could also say stick out as well. It's quite similar. And really it's just the opposite of fit in. Two really good words because they mean the opposite from each other. So if you fit in, you seem the same as everyone else. If you stand out, you look very different and you're very obvious for some reason. So here's a really good relevant example that I stand out a lot today because I am the only foreigner in the park talking to themselves on a camera. So somewhat self-conscious of that, but no one seems to care too much. Maybe it's not that unusual here. So yeah, today I'm standing out a lot. However, normally I do like to fit in to some extent. I do think there's a balance there. There's a balance of not standing out like crazy. You don't want to be wearing really ugly or crazy looking clothes. I mean, I don't want to anyway. But I'm not going to be ashamed of where I'm from. I'm not going to try to hide the fact that I am a foreigner because, well, first of all, it's obvious. And second of all, I think we should all be proud of where we're from. No one should be ashamed of the country they come from. So I think there's a balance to be had there of trying to fit in, but also not hiding where you're from. And that's a balance that I'm trying to find as well. This isn't the reason I do it, but I think another thing that kind of helps me fit in and maybe stand out from the other tourists is that when it's hot and I'm not filming, I'll often be wearing a mask to cover my face, maybe from the pollution, and also using an umbrella, or we could say a parasol, if you want to use the correct term, to shade myself from the hot, hot sun. So I don't think many tourists will use an umbrella in sunny weather. I think, speaking from a British perspective, it can be seen as a little bit silly. Like if I did that in the UK, I think I might get some young kids laughing at me. I think people in the UK really, really care about how they look. So it's not that common for foreigners to do that here. But I don't know, for me, protecting my skin is much more important than trying to fit in, right? Or trying to fit in with the other foreigners, we could say. So I think that's one thing that kind of helps me fit in with the locals a bit more, that maybe people know that I'm not a normal tourist. I don't know. I think honestly, realistically, people don't think about it as much as I do, right? And one really interesting thing, it's kind of annoying, but I suppose it can lead to some nice interactions with people, is if you go to unusual places, like I like to do and go for a walk, you get people questioning why you're there. Imagine in your home country, if you go for a walk down a really weird part of the town, you look like you're from the country, so no one's going to question why you're there. They're just going to assume you have some business or some reason to be there. But I like to go for walks everywhere, so sometimes I'll be on some really residential, local areas, just exploring, seeing what's new, seeing what it's like. And I'll have people coming up to me, like asking me, what are you doing here? Why are you here? Are you looking for the temple? And I have to explain, no, I'm just walking, like I'm not doing anything. And I get quite a lot of suspicion from the places I end up. So as I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just quite interesting how, because you stand out, because you don't fit in, you get treated differently. And people are kind of curious or confused when you go to certain places. I really have no idea, by the way, how long I've been filming. It's not that easy to tell on this camera, but you might be able to tell by my voice or maybe looking at my face that it's very hot. I am sweating a lot. So I may need to finish up soon. I may need to end it quickly. But one more thing I would like to touch on before we do go is two things: culture shock and reverse culture shock. Culture shock is this idea of going to a new place, a new culture, and just being surprised, being shocked because of how different it is. And I imagine most of you have experienced that to some extent. Even if it is in your own country, especially if you live in a larger country, it's likely that you will have experienced some kind of small culture shock, perhaps. But I do have to be a bit careful walking around here because I don't know what kind of animals I'm going to find. There could be snakes or something, so that might be why I'm like looking at the floor a little bit. I can't give you eye contact the whole time. But yeah, I think it goes without saying. In other words, it's obvious that I did have some culture shock when I first came here. I think the little things are what surprises you. Like, of course, we all know the big things, how life is different. But it's the little things that I think really surprise you, like the little habits that people have that are different than what you're used to. So I don't know, it may not be so interesting to talk about culture shock, but one thing that really interests me is reverse culture shock. And this is the idea of being shocked by the culture of your home country. And this happens when you're away from that country for an extended period of time. So it's coming up to a year now that I've been out of the UK. Never been out of the UK for that long before. And the longer I'm away, the more I learn about myself and of course my home country's culture. And maybe that's going to make for some interesting podcast episodes in the future as well. One example is before, when people would ask me about British humour, I wouldn't really know what to say. I think when you're living in something, it's quite hard to notice how that thing can be different. So I see British humour now as being quite sarcastic and dry. And it's very different to a lot of the people I meet here, especially Americans and other people. So that's quite interesting to notice. Well, I almost got it in time, but I just had to stop recording because the heavens have opened. In other words, it has just started raining. Not too heavy at the moment, but it may get heavier. I have my umbrella just in case anyway. The one final thing I'll say on reverse culture shock is how interesting I find it that British people tend to respond negatively to things. I've really noticed it since being here. You know, Thailand is such a positive place, and I've really noticed that difference. So for example, if you ask a British person, how are you doing? How have you been? They'll often reply in a kind of negative way, like, yeah, not bad, or could be worse, or something like that. You know, I've been better. There's some kind of negative comment. Even if they're saying they're good, they can't say good, they have to say not bad, which I find very interesting. Okay, so it started raining really heavily now. It's quite normal here because rainy season is just beginning. So we've got a long time of this kind of weather now. But anyway, I found somewhere sheltered just to say goodbye and finish up this podcast today. That's also one interesting difference actually, is how in the UK, when it starts raining, people get really sad and depressed. You know, you can tell people's mood is quite down. However, here it's very different. When it starts raining, people get quite happy because that means it's going to be a lot cooler and less hot and sticky. So that's one benefit of the rain here anyway. I would like to say a quick thank you though to 2 Apple podcast reviews that have been left recently. I'm prepared and I can read them on my phone here. So we've got one from Aryan, something like that, from Iran. But they said, since you mentioned there is no review on Apple Podcasts, I think the reason is that there's not any place separately for each episode to leave a comment or review. But Michael, I'm a big fan of your podcast. I follow you on Apple Podcasts and I learn a lot from you. Thank you so much. So thank you very much. Aryan, I appreciate that. I feel like I'm saying your name in a very Cornish accent, but hopefully that's not too wrong. And I got one more review here from Poland, and username is Kubak. And they said, Michael, I love your podcast. At the beginning of this year, I found your podcast, and a month ago, I finished listening to all the episodes. That's amazing. Thank you so much for listening. That's fantastic. What else did they say? I was so addicted that I became a member of Level Up English, and I just finished listening to all the episodes of your private podcast as well. That is amazing because we have over 100 of the private podcast ones, so you've listened to a lot, Kubak. That's amazing, wow. Thank you very much for your work. You've helped me improve my English before going to work in the USA. The best podcast. I'm so happy to hear that. Thank you very much. To both of you, but also for listening to so many episodes. It's just incredible, so thank you very much. Anyway, I'll leave it here today. I do hope you enjoyed this kind of video. It's not something I'm going to do regularly, but it's a bit of an experiment. Let's see if you like it. Let's see if you prefer the normal ones. My feeling personally is that the location is much nicer. It's kind of nice to see what's around me, but I feel like my brain is not working as well as when I'm inside. So maybe what I'm talking about is not as interesting. But anyway, let me know what you think. Maybe I'm wrong. If you want to see more of these kind of videos, I do have a lot of outdoor videos on my old YouTube channel, which is called English with Michael. I'll put a link to it in the show notes for this episode. But over there, I've got videos walking around London, around England, the countryside in England, and teaching English at the same time. So I don't really post there anymore, but if you want to see some older videos, I think some of them are really good, honestly, and they don't get that many views. So go over there, check them out if you want to. I'll just leave you with a quote today, which is relevant to the topic of today's episode, which is home is where the heart is. Home is not a place, it's not a building. I think home is where the heart is. So wherever you feel at home is your home, which means you can move home and you can find somewhere nice to live in a new place. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I'm gonna go have a rest now, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye. You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.